welcome to Unwarranted Music Opinions, the show in which music nerds forcefully jam music into each other's ear holes, let them slither around inside our brains before we spew forth opinions. I am June Lindberg, here with Brian Courtney.
Hello.
Chaz Jenkins.
I still hate that you do that every time.
It's gross.
And an extra special guest this week of Velocities and music fame. He also makes his own music. It's Tom Hummer, one of the inspirations for the show, actually.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's really, really great to have you on. I was surprised, but yeah, when Chaz told me, I was like, no, it was the same feeling when we got Dogface Hermans and James Ivory on the show. It's just like, what? So this is a regular episode, unthemed, anything goes. So we got 4 records to talk about. And we're going to kick things off with Tom's record.
So the record that I picked for you all to dive into this week was Fishmans' Long Season. And this is an album that, to kind of get into the story of how I learned about this, actually, it was Jake, my Velocities and music co-host. A few years ago, he sent me a message and just said, hey, I've been perusing Reddit. He's a big Redditor. I'm not so much. So every now and then when he finds something on there, he'll pass it along to me. And he's like, I was making a list of all these albums that I see people talking about on there a lot that I haven't heard. And he shared a spreadsheet with me because he loves spreadsheets. And Fishmans' Long Season was an album on there. And at the time, it wasn't on Spotify or any like major normal streaming platform that I could find, but I did find it on YouTube. And I put it on, and it's just, this 35-minute piece of music. I had no context for what it was, put it on and just kind of got lost in it. And I was really blown away by the end of it, because a lot of times, especially at this point in my life where, I've been really wholeheartedly listening to music with all the time I have for many years, it becomes increasingly rare when you find an album that really just knocks you off your feet. And so at this point, when an album can do that, I really stop and take notice. And Fishmans' Long Season was an album that did that for me. So I just wanted to keep coming back to it because it was so original. It was a vibe I'd never really heard. And I still, 3 years later, still just every now and then I'm like, I got to listen to that album, because nothing else I've listened to really captures the same feeling in the same musical way that this album does. So I'll get a little bit more into what I mean by that. But first, a little bit of background. I don't know a ton about Fishmans, but from the little bit of research I've done, they're a Japanese band, started in the late 80s and put out a few records in the 90s, primarily before their vocalist's untimely death in 1999. Obviously, always a tragedy when that happens. But they blended a lot of different genres in their work. And from the bits of other albums of theirs I've listened to, compared to Long Season, the album that we're talking about, the rest of their work is a little bit poppier, a little bit brighter, a little less experimental, but still like unique to an extent. But even alongside the rest of their work, Long Season really stands out as being this just huge, complex, multi-layered, multi-movement piece of music that really blends genres in a way I honestly have trouble describing. That's one thing that I loved about it when I first heard it, is I love music that challenges me to try to define it. And when I have trouble defining it, that's when I know, like, okay, this is something special. I was trying to explain it to some friends of mine in a way, like, comparing to some bands that they might understand and be able to relate the sound to. And like the closest thing I could come up with was like, this sounds to me like a mix of, like, if you were to take like Sigur Rós and Gorillaz and the Beta Band and like take certain elements of their sounds and jam it together, but then also maybe take some krautrock, like.
You know what I hear in this? I hear a little bit of Moon Safari, especially in that the way the bass sounds and how clear everything is and the keys.
For sure. Yeah. Air, that kind of lush, kind of dreamscape type sound. For sure, especially with that moving bass. But what was fascinating to me when I thought more about it is most of those comparisons that I just made came after this album. This album came out in 1996.
Way ahead of its time.
I completely agree.
Like, it's crazy how modern this thing sounds.
I totally agree. And I think that's why it's kind of had this like underground cult resurgence through being discovered in the internet as people are opened up to music from all other countries and all other cultures. Like, you know, the cream rises to the top, right? And I think people are talking about this for a reason. So anything that just defies typical genre definition like that is interesting to me. I saw this on Rate Your Music categorized as Neo-Psychedelia, Dream Pop, and Progressive Pop. And it's like, none of those are wrong, but I feel like none of them really encapsulate the album either. It's a lot of so many little things brought together into something that feels very consummate and natural at the same time. So that in itself is an achievement. But let me get into a little bit of like the actual instrumentation of it. The album starts with this kind of like really deep bass groove that just hooks me right away. It's got this kind of dub feel to it. And then these dreamy guitars, keyboards, this like kind of arpeggiated piano loop comes in that just becomes this kind of entrancing, hypnotic.
It's like the main melody because it picks back up at the end of the album. It's kind of like the string tying it all together. That that you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that kind of piano loop. And the beginning, the first few minutes acts as kind of like almost like an overture that you would hear in classical music, or like what Rush did on 2112 or The Who did on Tommy, like taking these musical themes and kind of like introducing them to you in little snippets at the beginning that then will all come back later on. So it's kind of the storytelling, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them kind of arc that happens across the whole album. But what impresses me is the song starts to develop. The vocals don't come in until about 4.5 minutes into the album. And I noticed that for the first time as I was preparing to talk about this album, because to me, the intro just flies by. All of the pieces flow so seamlessly that by the time the vocals come in, I'm like, oh shit, it's been 4.5 minutes. It feels like 2 minutes have gone by. And as all of the instruments flow in and out, you know, sometimes the drums will drop out and then come back in. So an accordion will come in. A new guitar part will come in.
Love that accordion.
And yeah, the accordion's great. It's a great flavor. Also kind of comes back to that, you know, you mentioned Moon Safari, June, that kind of French influence as well. Just a very worldly, multicultural sound here. But all of the instrumentation works so well together, flows in and out of the mix without you even noticing. And sometimes you'll have like 4 different instruments doing melodies at the same time, and somehow they're able to work together instead of working against each other. And that to me is just like mastercraft composition. The way that things work both vertically as like the musical layers that are stacked on top of each other at any given time, the way the song works horizontally as the pieces evolve and move in and out of the mix. It blows me away, the thought that must have gone into this, but just how seamless it all feels. I have some more to say, but I feel like I've been talking for a while, so I'll pass it over to the rest of you to kind of keep it going.
To start things off, like I mentioned, super ahead of its time. It blows me away as rich as the production is on this thing that it came out in 96. Like your comparisons, like the gorilla comparisons with the drum patterns that kick in every once in a while, and like just how heavy and fast they sound, total Gorillaz vibe there with how they do their drum production. I totally see what you're talking about there. The flow of this thing is superb. I can't even begin to describe how well that each like movement, we'll call it, goes into the next. It really does feel like one long track, but I mean on Rate Your Music, it's like it is separated, but
it's basically one long track with different, like you said, movements.
Well, it's cool that you mentioned an overture. This really does feel like a modern classical piece, the way that it has its movements and parts to it, but it's titled as just one long song. Like, I love that. I can see why Spotify just has it as the 35-minute track when you listen to it that way. As I mentioned, production, super vibrant. Everything's full and loud and crisp, but you can hear every little thing. Let's talk about some things I didn't like. The weird water sounds, not a fan of. I don't get it. It doesn't do anything for me. It just makes me scratch my head of why the hell this is here.
Mentioning krautrock, the middle section, which is the only section it's all a little experimental and it's genre fusing and everything. But I think that part is easily the most experimental, the most out there, the most avant-garde in a way. It really reminds me of Noi
Yeah.
the White and Red record, that middle, which has a similar middle section, that same kind of watery sound. It reminded me a lot of that particular section. And I kind of agree, Chad. It's not my favorite texturally. Yeah. It is really nice. I love how the water, it sounds like water, and it sounds like water flowing. It's just really interesting than it is catchy or tuneful part of the record. But
you wouldn't see a lot of
its own way, and I don't even really hate it. It just, there are parts I like more. I think it's a very necessary part of this long track because there's a level.
It's also kind of a cool down after tracks 1 and 2. The first half of the record has kind of put you in this different world, and this is kind of a slowing down of everything before it pulls back up again.
Mm-hmm. To talk about, you mentioned the middle part. That's probably one of my least, like, this is a great track because it is just one track, but the first part and the second, like the last part, are my favorite parts. The middle part I think is a little weak in comparison because the melodies in the first and last part are so good. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. But we don't get a lot of that.
Ear grabbing.
Yeah, we don't get a lot of that in the middle, the second and third part. We don't really get that a lot.
I will say that I don't necessarily see that as a flaw. I think that not every part of the song has to be as catchy and ear-grabbing as the next, and if some of it is more low-key in comparison, that can just help to highlight the parts of the song that are, really stand out, that have that deep bass, that undercurrent that goes through the whole thing.
I would agree.
This is sort of, like I said, a bit of a cool down for the record.
I would agree, but if you're going to have just one song that's 35 minutes long, you've got to keep me... got to keep my attention. I feel like in the middle part with the repeating drum loop and the noises, it kind of keeps me interested a little bit. But for as long as this thing is with it, doing many different things, I feel like what it does in the beginning and the end is just so much stronger. That keeps me because once that last part comes in, where the track ends and then that guitar comes back in with the melody, I'm like, yes, okay, we're back into it. That last 9 minutes is just so awesome.
Honestly, because this record's only 35 minutes long, we've talked about Swans, we've talked about Selected Ambient Works Volume 2, we've talked about Caretaker. It really doesn't bother me at all that
it's in a vacuum. We are talking about it in a vacuum. Right. The 35 minutes here.
Sure, but I think that when you're talking about a record, everything that you're talking about, if you're going to talk about an individual track, it's still in the context of the record, because we're talking about the records, not, if I pulled The End off of Abbey Road, right, and talked about it just by itself, it probably wouldn't be as powerful as when it comes at the very end of this long slew of tracks on Abbey Road. So I do think that it works contextually, and I think that sometimes that's all a track needs to do, and sometimes it'll sound a lot better in the context of the record.
Right.
I see where you're all coming from with that. I mean, if I could only listen to 6 minutes of this album for the rest of my life, then that wouldn't be the 6-minute section I'd pick, right? That's totally understandable. And I see why, a lot of music listeners would not, no one's going to be bobbing their head like, oh, hell yeah, to that part of the song. But I guess to me, the function that it performs is, it is kind of a come down from the first part. Also, we talked about that part feeling like more of the krautrock influence comes in there. I don't know if they were directly influenced by krautrock bands, but that's where more of that sound comes in. I feel like that's where the song, the rest of the album feels very ethereal and dreamy. And I feel like that's the part where things get grounded and it becomes more primal. You have the natural water sounds. You have the really pounding drums, what sounds like hand drums or some kind
of
drums. Drum holes.
The drumming throughout this thing is perfection. There's never a weak moment when it comes to the drum patterns, even in that middle half. I mean, that is just amazing.
Yeah. And it just ramps things up. One thing I want to say real quick is I feel like we're overlooking one part in the middle that kind of comes out of that weirder part with the water and stuff, and that's. It gets to this kind of lo-fi guitar chord progression comes in.
Oh,
and
yes.
That vocal part with the ba 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 ba. That's one of my favorite parts of the album.
Yes. Thank you, Tom.
So
that
moving to me.
Oh my god.
And I like it because you can't build back up into where you started unless you strip it down and kind of go to that lo-fi part. Like, so while I totally understand, I'm with you, the weird part in the middle is probably not going to be anyone's favorite section. For me, it just serves as like a palate cleanser. Like, okay, where has this album taken us? What lands have we gone to now? And then all of a sudden, it just kind of brings you back to something really melodic but simple.
Yeah.
As the sound starts to get richer and more hi-fi and build back into where you started. I think that's just a brilliant piece of building that they do there.
I think we should talk about the lyrics a little bit. Even though they are in Japanese, Genius does translate it. They're very introspective and like kind of about like memory, looking back on the past, like talking about looking through a rear view mirror. Very cool. It's very subtle, and it just goes by so quick because when the female Japanese vocals come in, it's like just part of the music. You don't really, and if you don't understand it, you know, that's just kind of, you just kind of taking the vibe. But reading through them, they're kind of interesting. They really do kind of put the whole perspective of like long seasons. You know, when you think about looking back on the past and everything, it really just tie in together. I think it's a really cool, like you mentioned, Tom, just how well they put this whole thing together. The whole package deal is really, really and meticulously put together.
With this thing kind of blowing up retroactively, I kind of went in with like a healthy dose of skepticism, I feel like, because sometimes retroactively things will get blown up. I think Death Consciousness had a similar thing happen to it, where it was kind of a retroactive.
Sweet Trip is another long season. You see Velocity Design Comfort by Sweet Trip. You see Death Consciousness. It's like every internet Zoomer has got to have those 3 albums.
They're very internet. You know, they're revived by being able to become more easily rediscoverable via the internet. So I kind of go into these with
French
skepticism.
noise rock band from the 70s. That's
I go in with like a very healthy dose of skepticism because I know I like it when a lot of people get excited about a piece of music. That makes me want to listen to it more because to me it's kind of like it's becoming canon and I love to be a part of that larger experience. But my music taste doesn't really line up, I guess a lot of the time, or maybe it does more than I think, with music circles online. People who are way ahead of me, who've heard way more canon stuff, right, have a much larger listening background. And so when they're kind of at this point in their music listening where they're indulging their own taste, they know what they like, a lot of it, they know what their absolute favorites are. So now they're kind of going through the endless catalog of those genres and trying to find the records that are going to mean a lot to them that not really a lot of people know about. And this is one of those, and it's blown up. You know, so I was kind of worried that this would be sort of, for lack of a better term, indulgent by the music community.
Or just disappointing, like not live up to the hype. You were like that with a couple records we've talked about with the show. Slint being the most notable that you were not a big fan of.
Yeah, it was not as big a fan as people. I guess there's certain expectations with albums that are so coveted. But then I listened to it, and that was all wrong. I wasn't even worried about it.
I got to say, Tom, have you ever heard of Gal Costa?
Recognize the name.
Brazilian
artist, part of the Tropicalia movement.
Okay.
MPB stuff.
Still to this day, until Fishmans, the most vibey piece of music we've ever listened to. Then I listened to Fishmans. This thing is as vibey as it gets. I remember making a joke, I can't remember which episode, guys, I made it, but about lo-fi hip-hop beats to study to. Well, shit, now we've got like the actual prequel to that playlist because this would fit right in there.
Talking about genres for this thing too, I know it's hard to kind of, like you said, Tom, it's hard to kind of explain what kind of genres this thing is. It challenged you in the way to present it. The first thing I thought of, and I was really surprised that no one said it, and because this is pre the genre's biggest classics, but this thing to me is like a total post-rock classic. Like in terms of its many movements, its build towards the end, I don't really see that connection being made a lot with it.
I think that's because it's not really rocky because there's a lot of like synths and there is guitar.
Well, you look at a band like Sigur Rós, like we talked about earlier, who's not the most, I wouldn't describe.
They do have like guitar kind of explosions or like Evo
this album
explosions.
Actually, my favorite moment on this one is the guitar explosions. The fourth section with that just cathartic guitar solo, just fantastic. I love how the guitar sounds there, and you have all these gentle, beautiful melodies coming in before, like you said, the piano phrases, the great accordion, the wonderful vocal melodies, and then you just have this wonderful like summery guitar. It's moving, it's really moving, and it's just wails away until we get to the last section of the song. And to me, that is the ultimate release of this album. Like that to me is the climax of all, like the sum of its parts are up to this point, and then we sort of get this epilogue to just give us a satisfying play
all
out.
The
and,
melodies,
like you said, Tom, it comes back, tell them what we're told, tell them again, kind of thing.
And then
you said it better. Well, the thing you said was way better.
Then how all the melodies at the end are just on top of each other, and it like you said, it totally works.
The wonderful density. It's so rich, and because it's produced so richly too, it all just comes across incredibly well. And to me, it like, to get back to the Sigur Rós comparison, like I wouldn't describe Sigur Rós as like kick ass. Like that's not like an adjective or a phrase I'd use to describe Sigur Rós. They are a little bit more epic than this Fishmans record in my experience with them, but it's kind of the same. There's similarities there in the gorgeousness, and and this thing is not really that far removed from the earliest post-rock that we see as culturally significant.
Yeah. I think how smooth and how clear and clean everything is maybe could even remind you a little bit of those late career Talk records that are often discussed as being the very beginning of post-rock, or going before that. Oh crap, I forgot the name of that band. There's that other band, they were like a post-punk-y kind of thing, a little bit ambient. It's mostly just, Tom, you might know what I'm talking about. There's the 80s. They have like the guitar's tone essentially is just very ambient and ethereal.
That could be like thousands of bands that you just described there. Like, come on.
Yeah, but Tom likes post-rock, so I feel like it might...
Well, Tom has not heard every post-punk album that is...
I'm trying to think of what it might be. I definitely agree with the Talk comparison. I think that's spot on.
Yeah.
Not to necessarily stop the conversation, but just my final thoughts, because I find I have the least to say nowadays. But
you really do.
But honestly, talking about those other records, and like I said, my experience with the canon is I would describe it as... in basketball, if you're not very good at basketball, they describe you as limited. So I would say, I'm limited with the musical canon. But in the post-rock I've heard, which I've heard more of than some things, and just that, in general, the long, kind of beautiful or dreamy piece of music, this thing really stands up to just about everything else I've heard. It's so quality. It's like you said, the cream rises to the top for the reason. I mean, this is like delicious cream. It's just so good.
Hell yeah.
It's awesome. I don't know.
It has received like a ridiculous amount of acclaim. Like it's in the top 50 of all time on Rate Your Music now.
It's showing up.
In 2011, 50 people had rated it. Like no one knew about this thing. This is a 2010s internet just like explosion. Now like literally on Rate Your Music.
4.16. It's crazy. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but how many ratings?
Right. Just the number of people that have heard it. That to me is always more impressive because
that's crazy.
It's more people are talking about it. It has like it's really up there with some of like the Radiohead stuff, like some of the and RIM's not the only site in the world, obviously, but it's pretty much the biggest hub for music listening as far as I know now. Like there's tons of people on there, and it's a thriving community, really, or at least a sustained one. And for this thing to get blown up like it did, it really is a beautiful thing. The internet's not perfect, but it's so amazing that this really could have only happened in the timeline we exist, in the period of time that we exist. And that's a beautiful thing. That's such a beautiful thing.
It just makes me jealous. I wish I was a little old Japanese boy in 96 when this came out and I could have listened to it and just had it for myself.
Episode. Chaz wishes he was a little Japanese boy.
I'm going to go with a decent 8. This thing kicks ass. Like, for real. Good pick, Tom. For real.
I think it's sort of a... it's well known, right? But it doesn't mean, we picked well known stuff before. This show's not about digging through the dregs. It's about talking about music we want to talk about. And I remember the first time around, once I kind of realized what the canon was getting an idea. I didn't want to include canon picks. I feel like I'd get to it eventually. And I've kind of gone back on that because I think being introduced to them in this way, you're forced to, right? Like you have to jam it into your ears, so to speak. And so I'm just so grateful. I'm just so grateful that I get to exist in the same time as this thing because it's so wonderful. It's just so wonderful and beautiful. And it would have never. It took 40 years, like half a century, or
96.
96. Divide that by 2,
I was
Brian.
born the year after.
Divide that by 2, my guy.
Run it back. Run it back. Chaz, you gotta cut that part out.
It's in.
Cut it out. But some 30 odd years for this thing to really kind of blow up.
30 odd. I just said I was born the year after.
No.
How old do you think I am?
It's like almost 30. 30 odd means almost 30.
I'm not almost 30.
Brian,
20 odd years.
Brian, you're being a big head right now. Big head hours.
I know. I rounded 1996 down.
No, you rounded your big head. You rounded your big head with that awful math you just did.
Big, round, smooth brain.
It took a long time.
There you go.
It took a long time for this thing to kind of blow up in the way it did, and
rate it, Brian. Come on.
It's just crazy to me. There's music that's this old that will never be talked about again, or stuff that and there is stuff from this period that has been talked about for this long. It just amazes me that this is being praised now for the first time at this level, and it's just such a unique situation. I don't know if I can really even get that across.
Albums like this, that Long Season is on another level of praise. Post-mortem. Oh shit, that was the wrong word to use because the singer died. Anyway, after the fact, a couple decades later. But it also, I think, helps prove that there are more albums like this that are out there. Like every year, every month, something new will kind of blow up, even if it's only 200 people on Rate Your Music at First that have heard it. Right? That's how this started. That's how Fishmans began. It's not like a big group of 10,000 people all discovered it at the same time. These things can take a long time to really start building. So there are other albums like this out there. It's always worth it to continue to explore stuff from the past.
Did their discography reverse blow up? I know the live version of this song, there's a live record with this version of the song that's a little bit longer that has also received acclaim. But did their discography receive, did people go back? Did they?
Yeah. People listen to
That's
their
so crazy. That is I know their discography is small. It's just so crazy to me. It just blows my stupid little monkey brain wide open into chunky, meaty pieces. Is really what it does. So anyway, yeah, I would go with a decent or a strong A. I mean, this thing is, believe the hype. It's actually incredible. It's like the first time, everyone talks about. And I'm not saying it's on the same level, but I don't think this comparison's that crazy, honestly. But it's like how people tell you all the time that a Bob Dylan record is good. And you're like, it's like a million years old by Brian math. So how good could it be? And then you listen to it, you're like, oh, wait, it's great. So just believe the hype. Because honestly, it's amazing. It's just kind of amazing.
So for me, and as I've discussed on the show before, the number one thing that's going to make me gravitate towards an album and love it a lot is emotion. If I emotionally connect to something or resonate with it in some way. And while I love this record, and it is a great record, everything positive that we said about it does remain true, it's not really one that I come back to all that often. It's not really one that is part of my core being, kind of. It's not a record that I get a whole lot of catharsis out of. It's more of a record that I put on. I'm like, damn, this is well made. And this is such a fun little groove to ride for 35 minutes. It's such a cool, unique world with a great atmosphere. And it's super, super enjoyable. But my enjoyment of it doesn't go beyond that to adoration or obsession. I just remembered, that's what you and Jake would say, Tom. If you really, really like something, but you're just not at the point of wanting to listen to it all the damn time.
Yeah.
That's the difference between an 8 and a 9 or a 10. Yeah. Just that personal connection. And I don't really have that personal connection with this record. It's really good. It's great, even. And you should absolutely check it out. I'm at a decent 8 as well. Maybe a light to decent 8. Yeah, everything positive that was said about it, I concur.
For me, it does have that kind of X factor, that emotional appeal, that several different times within the album, I'm just moved emotionally. And you're right. You either feel it or you don't. Some music does that for you and some music doesn't. And this one really does that for me. Kind of a good quick story that's a testament to that is I listened to this album just a few times in preparation for this, since I already knew it pretty well. It was my pick. And I listened to it once in my car when I was driving into Ames last week on Thursday, and it was a very warm, sunny day, unseasonably warm, 70 degrees out in Iowa, and blue skies. and it fit the mood perfectly. It was upbeat. I was vibing with it. I was enjoying my drive. I listened to it last night on my drive to Ames again, and this time it was dark and foggy and about 40 degrees. And somehow it still fit the vibe perfectly. Like, it just, different parts of the music come out and speak to you in different ways, depending on the context in which you're listening, depending on your personal mood. And I think that not everyone's going to have that reaction to it. Not everyone is going to resonate with it in that way. But for me, it really does. It's one of those pieces of music that does work on me in that level. So, I mean, for me, this is a 10. Probably not surprising because I picked it. I love this album. It's what I'm looking for in music. So, but I'm glad that you all enjoyed it as well.
Oh, you nasty boys.
The record I chose
nasty
is...
Sorry.
I'll go. I'll leave. I'll go. I'll be gone.
She's like, fuck you guys.
Yeah.
The record I chose is the 1978 debut, and as far as I can tell, only record by, it looks like they have one from 2015 that no one cares about. Anyway, it's the Rezillos out of Edinburgh, Scotland. That's the cringiest shit when somebody with an Eastern KY, like slight Eastern KY drawl goes Edinburgh. The Rezillos with Faye Fife, who's the coolest person ever, and Eugene Reynolds. Yeah, on vocals. They are a pop punk, very melodic, very energetic, just classic 1978. Late 70s punk, new wave. But there definitely is a lack of grit and grime, and there is a little bit of that punk attitude, but it's not the number one thing that you go to this record for. Like, for example, this record has guitar solos. So already, it's not like 3-chord punk rock. There's quite a bit more going on here in the production, the arrangements, the instrumentation. It's certainly it's hard to say ambitious, because I do think at this same time, one of the biggest ambitions in this genre and in the style was how aggressive can we take it? Like, if it's not in the Ramones or Sex Pistols, as much as I hate to reference Sex Pistols, because I just don't like Sex Pistols very much. If you're not doing that just aggressive, straightforward, 3-chord, just snotty and angry presentation, you'd be sort of derided. Like, there was this divide that was kind of beginning. And the Rezillos kind of fall somewhere in the middle, because while their chord progressions and their songwriting are still reminiscent of like 50s rock and roll in the way a lot of punk music is, these pretty standard like blues chord progressions that are just chord vocal line type of situation. There, like I said, there's a lot. The production is pretty clean. There are guitar solos. There's other shit going on in the mix, and it's pretty darn poppy. I personally love this record. This is very much my thing, especially when there's female vocals.
No, stop the presses. Stop the fucking presses. You love this?
Crazy.
No way.
Punky girl vocals. June, I'm shocked.
There's no way.
I think this is fantastic. I think the energy is just so wonderfully just infectious and fun.
So,
and I listened to this on the way to work for like a good 5 months, just on the way to work, on the way home from work, on the way to work. It's the perfect summer windows rolled all the way down, blasting it kind of album. It's just so goddamn fun.
The best way I could describe this album is if imagine early Devo, like debut Devo, covered an AC/DC song. And this is what you would get.
That is a weird comparison. I'm sorry, but what the fuck?
But it's perfect because you've got songs like
Don't made a face.
You've got songs like Flying Saucer Attack, which sounds like something Devo would write. Absolutely.
So you mean in terms of like maybe the ridiculously a little bit?
Yeah.
I'm not experienced with Devo, but like I know Whip It, I know their biggest song.
But
so
that's
I'm
when they were
really
more
privy
new
to their
wavy.
sound,
Early
but-
Devo was like post-punk guitars, like Are We Not Men, Are We Devo? That is like what era I'm talking about. If they cover like an AC/DC song, because the guitar solos, it's a little bluesy, they're loud, and like 50s rock and roll that you mentioned, June, perfect. Like that's, but there's like so many other things going on here. Like I made a comparison with June where it was like, this seems like the groundwork for what would become skate punk. Like, imagine playing Tony Hawk to this music.
Wow. That is such a spot on comparison.
I literally was playing Tony Hawk the first time I put this on.
Was it the
not
remaster
kidding.
or were you emulating?
No, it was the remaster.
Yes,
And
yes, Tom.
It honestly fit.
Yeah.
It fit perfectly. It fit the whole vibe perfectly. You're absolutely right.
This is gonna be the only place I get to squeeze this in, Chaz. Is there's a Rezillos song in because me and you love Jackass, but the first Jackass movie has someone's gonna get their head.
No way.
That absolutely is on the first sound because I was listening to it and I was like, this is totally because they love that. That's all they use in those videos. That classic punk music.
Yeah. This fucking
and
thing
it's in there. It's crazy. It's crazy.
is the best thing June's ever picked. It's not a 10, but it's the best thing June's ever picked.
Haven't you given 10s to stuff that I've picked before?
Doesn't matter.
Like
Does
no
not,
borders here.
It doesn't fucking matter.
We're throwing it out.
This is the best thing that June has ever picked for the show, and probably will be the best thing that June ever picked to the show. I wish she picked this instead of Minutemen for the first episode, because then it would have been like
your horses, buddy. Like you were going too hard on this. Like I love this record. Better than The Walking. Better than No Borders Here.
Yes. Not
better.
No. It's not a 10.
Than...
It's not a 10, but it's just what a fucking good pick. Tracks 1 through 5 and tracks 8 through 13. Flawless. Not a damn thing wrong. That little portion of tracks from It Gets Me to I Can't Stand My Baby, maybe 2000 AD, just a little weak in comparison. Just a little weak in comparison to those other tracks that I just mentioned. But from Flying Saucer Attack to Top of the Pops and from Glad All Over to the end, amazing. Absolutely stunning. God tier. The drumming and bass on this thing is phenomenal. Oh my god. And the hold on for be and like that oh my god. Oh my god. It's so fucking awesome. Good. It's so fucking good.
The performances on this record again, like
tight
differs from your standard punk stuff because they obviously know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Like I said earlier, I have a Beat Happening poster on my wall. I am totally down with amateurism in my music. I vibe with it like a lot. Like, and some of the stuff I brought to the show has been like people who barely know what the hell. I like the Shags. Okay, like amateurism is cool. However, it just adds so much to this record because there's so many little melodies, the bass lines that the bass lines are like supporting the songs, but they also have their own little sub melodies that just add so much.
The guitars are crunchy and loud. Oh, sorry, Tom. I'm sorry. I just love this thing so goddamn much.
That's fine.
You go.
No, it's a great point. The musicianship is top notch here. And I think that punk music in general gets a bad and unfair reputation for being, like you mentioned, like the 3 or 4 chord power chord stuff.
Which
right?
is great.
Really,
and that's still awesome.
That stuff's fine, but really a lot of punk is not like that. You mentioned Sex Pistols and like Dead Kennedys is another one. You listen to them and like, damn, the musicianship is tight. But I think like where a band like Dead Kennedys, to continue that comparison, which really doesn't sound much like this, but that's my point, is that's another band with top-notch musicianship, but in a way the production almost works against them in that way. It works for them in terms of capturing an energy and a vibe, but it works against them because it kind of muddles some of the details that's happening in the intricate instrumentation. I feel like what's interesting about this Rezillos album is it's got that aggression and that detail and just the everybody working their ass off on the instrumentals, but it's got slick enough production that you don't lose any of those details in the mix. It all comes out, it's all clear to you. And for that reason, this album to me is more than any other album I've ever heard it's a fine line between what people would call punk and what people would call new wave. And I think this sits squarely on that line.
It's right in that line.
Anything I've ever,
That's such a great point.
Like I said, yeah. Exactly.
Because, it's more polished than like the Ramones or the Sex Pistols. It's less slick than like Blondie or the Cars, but it's like right in the middle. But still, it's got this aggression and energy to the performances that is undoubtedly punk. It's not this like overly electronic synthesizer driven thing. It's very much bass guitar drums working their asses off, but it's just got this production quality that almost makes me feel like I'm listening to something that came out in the 90s. Now, part of that too is I believe what I was listening to on Spotify was the remastered version, I think.
Potentially, yeah.
But still, I mean, I've listened to remastered versions of all their albums from that era, and they still don't come out sounding quite that good.
One critique, and this is going to flip June's lid like it always does. Lyrics, kind of disappointing.
Do you not like her vocals?
No.
Whatever.
The lyrics are a little disappointing. So obviously June disagrees with me. I'm wondering what Tom and Brian, you think about this take. I think the lyrics are a little disappointing because you've got songs like When the Flying Saucer Attack, amazing. Somebody's going to get their head kicked in tonight, amazing. But then you got songs like It Gets Me, or even though I love this song, I like it. Or No, that just seems kind of odd, where it's like, can I go out at the park at night? No, because even though I love that fucking song, I just feel like lyrically, this album could be so much more. I feel like they don't go all the way with their ridiculousness in the lyrical content. But that's just me. What do you guys think?
Honestly, I agree. I agree with you, honestly. Like, the lyrics aren't what I'm coming to this record for, really. Like,
it's not. I'm coming for the drumming and bass. Yeah.
They're funny, they're lighthearted, they're upbeat, but there's not, like, a whole lot to dig in.
Now,
it's not like...
My Baby Does Good Sculptures is a fantastic lyrical song. Love that track to death. Oh, man.
That song is great. Let me weigh in on the lyrics thing real quick, because I liked the lyrics, but not really as much in themselves, because I agree, like, there's not really a lot of depth to pull from them, but I like them in the context of late 70s punk, because this is a band that clearly doesn't take themselves too seriously in a world of bands that had their heads so far up their asses, they took themselves way too seriously. Yeah. Right. I kind of like, especially the dynamic between the two vocalists.
Yes. Oh my God.
The female vocalist, I get a strong X-Ray Specs vibe from, and the male vocalist is a lot grittier. So they bring that dynamic of, like, on one side of the coin, you've got the melodic, attractive, endearing kind of side of things. On the other side of it, you've got this gritty, aggressive, like...
And that accent. That accent is strong, and it's amazing.
It's and I actually think, for me, the lyrics fit with that because they're kind of silly. They're not trying too hard to be political or timely or topical.
Even Cold Wars is kind of silly. Like, it doesn't even really touch on the topic all that much. They just...
Clearly, they didn't sit down and be like, how are we going to make this deep, profound album? But that's actually kind of refreshing in the way that, like, I find the Ramones to be kind of refreshing. I think June mentioned, like, a throwback to, like, 50s, 60s rock that you have in here with songs like It Gets Me and I Like It and Glad All Over. They're a little bit sappy. They're a little they're a little bit campy, but it kind of brings me back to that 50s, 60s style rock that I like. And in that way, kind of reminds me of the Ramones too, just in the fact that, like, the Ramones weren't singing about politics and stuff all the time. They were singing about, I want to go sniff some glue. I want to walk around and hold your hand. Like, that's it. And that always felt much more Buddy Holly to me than punk rock. And I get that kind of vibe from this album too. So to me, it actually brings this kind of endearing quality that, like, sure, it's limited in its depth, but it also is very self-aware and deliberate in what it's trying to accomplish.
Brian, disappoint us, Brian.
I'm maybe the least positive, I think, on this album overall.
Oh, you think?
For reasons that you all kind of got into. Lyrically, not a lot pulling me in here. And I don't think, even though the instrumentals are really good, I just don't think there's a lot of songwriting on here that really grab me or keeps me around or makes it very memorable for me.
Fills, come on, dude. How?
So, I mean, they're technically gifted, and, like, and there's some cool moments on it, and I pretty much love the bass on throughout the whole thing. But it doesn't stick with me in the slightest. Let me talk about the songs that stick with me the most. It's actually It Gets Me, I Like It, Flying Saucer Attack.
Yeah, they're
those
awesome.
are my favorite songs, far and away. I love the cheesiness. I feel like when the band is really accentuating these goofy traits, that is kind of a quality that you all seem to like. And then the upbeatness, the not so seriousness. I think their best songs come out when they're really playing to those strengths. Especially, like the catchiest part of this whole album to me are the refrains on It Gets Me. I love the unhealthy. Like, it's so memorable.
Yeah.
It's so awesome and cartoony. But most of the songs, and Somebody's Gonna Get Their Head Kicked In Tonight is like a rager.
Best song.
Just a really good
Best
rager.
fucking
And the opener's
song.
really good too. That's another really goofy one. I just think that a lot of the songs on here for me are like 2000 AD. Are just not very fleshed out lyrically.
Yeah, I agree. That sounds kind of weak.
It sounds cool, but it doesn't really stick with me. And that's how a lot of the songs really on here read to me. Glad All Over is the same way. I don't like the last leg of the songs that much either. It's just a matter of it sticking with me and me wanting to go back to it. And I just never get that feeling. I will say, though, I was so surprised to find this thing out as like contemporary with the Ramones and all that stuff. Like I said, I don't really know what a lot of those bands sound like. I'm not very versed in this period of music, especially punk music. I was surprised to see it came out around the same time. And to me, that kind of gave me a little more appreciation for it just in context, right? Because I think that's important, is to have the context for when it came out. It's not that it's unoriginal or anything like that. I just think the strongest things that pull me in about albums are like songwriting. So to talk about one we just talked about, Fishmans, I think this album, talking about, like, to my ears, even though the production's not the same and the instrument, it's totally, it's like apples to sausages. But like I like a bit of the sausage and I like a bit of the apple, but I think the songwriting on Fishmans, if I were just comparing these two specifically, is what would set it apart. It's, to me, it just catches my ear so much more. It's so much more memorable, and the qualities it has are pretty much maximized in terms of like, where can we take this? And I feel like on this album, a lot of the times that we get are just a lot of so-so punk songs with a couple of really unique songs sprinkled in. And the band's personality doesn't shine through enough to really make this thing stick around for me, any more than doing it for the show.
The bass and drums
see myself
alone.
going back to it.
The bass and drums alone destroy your take about the songwriting on here. Alone destroy your take. Like, seriously, Brian, that's awful. I was expecting this. Oh, fuck.
I still like it, but everyone has already said kind of what I like about it. I just happen to like different songs more. And
you're bad at music, sir.
Okay.
You're just straight up bad at listening to music. Here's why this album is better than you think it is, and why you're wrong. Because that's what this show is about: is proving each other wrong and not, getting to experience different kinds of music and like compare our tastes and everything.
It's just who's the better, who's better, who's better.
Here's why I'm right and you're wrong.
The show is like
who's better at music. This is why I'm better at music.
This show is just like a dead marriage. It's just being dragged out way past. Like there's no saving this relationship. But
Anyway, so songwriting all across the board, including on 2000 AD, which is one of my favorite songs on the record,
really? Of all
is
the songs?
absolutely fantastic, in my opinion. I think the vocal melodies and the presentation and the energy and the performances make every word that comes out of the two vocalists' mouths memorable, because it's them who's saying it, and they're just putting so much into the performances. I also think that these relatively simple song structures across most of this record are elevated so highly by, as Chaz mentioned, drum fills, bass lines, just little guitar solos that will pop and will genuinely be really good guitar solos that are memorable and not just, having a solo for the sake of having a solo. They actually add to the track. Some of my favorite tracks that are just super, super catchy, in my opinion. Top It Pops, 2000 AD. I love I Can't Stand My Baby. It's just a classic. Da-na-na-na-na-na-na. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Like, just that repeat, that call and repeat with the guitar line doing the calling and the vocals doing the repeating. Adore Glad All Over, especially because of Faye Fife's vocals. And to mention Faye Fife, she's absolutely, of course, Scottish woman in punk music.
It's kind of your thing right
no
now.
brainer.
Yeah.
No
Time
brainer.
capsule with the
I
season.
don't like. She's not polystyrene. Like
She's not Marion
No one
Coots.
is polystyrene.
She's not.
You can't beat "Oh Bondage Up Yours." It's just you can't beat her vocal performances. But Faye Fife, she's up there. She's up there. She's fantastic. And the male vocalist as well, I keep forgetting his name, should not be discounted either, because normally you might think, it's a record with a split male and female vocalists. Of course, June is always going to prefer the one's female vocalist because that's her thing. I think he's great enough on his own to make it that every time he's on, it's not like I'm thinking, damn it, where did Faye Fife go? God damn it, I want Faye Fife back. Like, he's good enough that
You're probably thinking that anyway a little bit.
Yeah.
That's just because it's you.
Not really. No, I am honestly not. And it's similar. Like there hasn't been. I love the male-female vocal dynamic in punk music. The only other band that's coming to mind right now is X, which is another just great punk band. Not really super similar to the Rezillos, but still really, really good in their own right. I love this record. I think the energy and the instrumentation and everything, like, one of the things that I love about listening to music that I've mentioned before, in addition to the emotion, and I feel like this probably came from growing up on the Grateful Dead, growing up on like a lot of instrumental music, like listening to Grateful Dead jams or Fish jams or something, or like my first band I ever got into was Fish, right? And listening to like live Fish cuts. It's little bits of instrumentation. A little bass line here, a little drum fill there, a little guitar bit there, just the way something sounds for about 2 seconds before it's gone. This album is chock full of those little moments, in my opinion. It's just full of them. And sometimes those are what really takes something to the next level for me. If every time I listen to it, every time I come back to it, I'm hearing something that I didn't quite catch before, or some little tidbit of personality in the instrumentation that I didn't quite catch before, that's going to be a favorite of mine. It has to be. I love that shit. So that plus emotion, which I get from this, I get just that energetic, just celebratory kind of emotion. It's a done deal. Of course, I love this thing.
I'm with you on this one, June. I think I like this a lot more than Chaz and Brian. But it also is up my alley. And I got to say, when I first saw that this was on the list, and I saw, okay, it's a one-off punk album from 1978 from a band I've never heard of who didn't really put out any other albums, after this. I got to say, I was a little skeptical. I'm like, this could be any range of quality, right? And by the end of my first listen, I was kind of like, why isn't this canon alongside any other like punk album from this era? Because it's got a lot of the strongest traits of the best music that was coming out at that time, but it does so in a unique way, blending the male and female vocalists. As you mentioned, really X is one of the only bands I can think of too that did that very well at around that time. But also, like, just right away from Flying Saucer Attack, I was like, okay, this gives me kind of an X-Ray Specs vibe. This is cool, And then tracks 2 and 3 came on, and somebody's going to get their head kicked in tonight. And I was like, damn, anything is on the table at this point. Like, they're covering so many different kinds of punk music that by the end of it, I was like, why have I never heard of this before? Like, why? I don't know. Maybe it's being talked about in circles, and maybe I just need to get into those circles. But I kind of don't understand why it's not like up there alongside, because I think it's right on par with them. And actually, I understand what you guys were saying about, the songwriting maybe not being the strongest in spots. I felt like it was consistently good, and I appreciated the variety that it brought, because there's a lot going on here. This is not a punk album of every song is cookie cutter the same. They're doing a lot here. And I wonder if people just didn't get into the style as much back then, and for that reason, maybe it never really rose to that level.
Yeah,
but,
maybe like you said, it was straddling the line between punk and new wave so much that people didn't really know who it was for.
Yeah,
it could be a geographical thing too. Like, they were a Scottish band, so that.
Well, there's plenty of like stuff in the UK at this time. I mean, and Edinburgh is big enough of a city for a band like this to probably get picked up. And I mean, they did have Top of the Pops, which was a pretty big single. That was a pretty big hit, actually. So maybe they're like this, maybe history views them as like a one-hit wonder type group. But it turns out that the album is just great.
Regardless how you slice it, this thing is fucking awesome. And I'm so glad you picked it, June. I love this thing. Tom, you're wrong. I'm right there with you. Brian's the dum-dum.
Oh, okay.
Here.
All right.
Brian's the dum-dum.
Maybe I just didn't have as many criticisms as you did. That's fair.
For me, this is a light 9. It's almost perfect. It's just the couple of songs don't bring a lot to the table. And I think lyrically, it's at its best when it's kooky. With like Flying Saucer Attack, somebody's gonna get their head kicked in tonight. Those kooky songs, or Baby's Good at Sculptures, like those kooky songs are when it's best lyrically. So I feel like if more of that was across the board, it'd be just like elevated even higher. But I mean, the drumming, bass, and guitar alone make this thing just an amazing experience. And it's 30 like something minutes, so it's quick, it's a breeze. You can put it on multiple times, get a lot out of it. I mean, I love this thing. This thing's fucking awesome. This is one of your best picks to the show, June, for sure.
I really like the point about this thing being canon, because even though it's not really for me, I don't see why not. It's around the same time. It's pretty good, like despite all my criticisms. Despite my generally kind of indifferent attitude towards it personally, I do think that there's enough here that people should seek it out and give it a listen, because it's around that same time period, and it's writing that line is such a good point about it too. It's a very unique release. It's not without its merits, in my opinion. And I think in the greater scheme of things, we can retroactively look at things in the time period they were released and maybe give them a little more praise. I don't see why this thing's any less deserving of that.
I agree.
Than any other album. Mm-hmm. So, but personally, I'm just
now punch my gut.
Listening perspective. Personally, from my listening perspective, there's only a handful of good songs on here. For me that like really, really stand out. And the rest is just kind of, and this isn't really a fair critique necessarily because it's from that era, it's from that time period. And maybe it's just a case of not being in the mood for it or something. I don't know. I would love to come out more positive later, but it's just a little, to my ears, just kind of run of the mill. It's just really what I feel like when I'm listening to it, despite its unique qualities. I don't really find anything for me that draws me or attaches me to it. Despite being able to acknowledge the unique qualities of it and seeing how and agreeing with that, in the canon of punk music overall, yeah, why not? Give it a listen. But I would have to personally go with like a light to decent 6. I'm not too crazy about this thing.
Ugh.
I'm gonna go with a light 9. That's what I was planning on. So I'm right with Chaz on this one.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go with a light to decent 9.
Oh shit.
One-upping Tom and Chaz by just like adding that decent.
My number's sort of like a 9.
if you flip it on its side, if you flip it
if
inside,
you were like, I'm doing a
headstand.
headstand.
Yeah.
So really, we all agree. Just
so, the album I picked is. It says a studio album on Rim, but that's bullshit. The compilation album by the British punk band from UK, I believe. It says right here, it's right. Cheddington, UK. Shout out to Cheddington. Wat Tyler. Wat Tyler, and their compilation album Tummy. All the context. Here it comes. Dump truck. Okay. So whenever I bring something to the table that's the wild card, sometimes I have like a pick that's like, okay, this is a Chaz core pick, but like we kind of get where he's coming from. Whenever I bring the wild card picks, the first thing they always want to know is how the fuck did I find this? So this is one of my less stellar moments of discovery, but it's still fun to talk about. I was on Rim and I was trying to find Tyler Childers' Rim page so I could look at his new country album. And I only put in Tyler by accident. And I scroll down and I find their album cover for the album Fat of the Band, which parodies Fat of the Land by one of my favorite electronic musicians, The Prodigy. On the cover, I can only presume to be the man himself, Wat Tyler, being the crab. But then I was floored by one of the greatest album covers I've ever seen. Their album Tummy, with a magnificent gut, parodying the Portishead album Dummy. Amazing.
Why are you showing us visually? It's an audio show. We've seen it.
But I'm going to put a picture
on the cover of the video. Why are you showing it to us?
Because this album cover is fantastic. It's fantastic. So I was like, okay, stop everything. Fuck Tyler Childers. We've got to listen to this. So I tried to find it as fast as I could, and I listened to it.
First mistake.
Yeah, like, this is like...
And imagine my surprise to see this album cover and hear the first 2 tracks with some of the best female vocal jangle pop I've heard in my time. I was like, holy shit. I was like, whoa.
It's good.
I was like,
the first
whoa.
2 tracks are good.
What the fuck? And then it makes me belch play. I was like, all right, there it is. And I was floored. I was absolutely floored by this thing. So, Wat Tyler, Cheddar UK, English punk novelty band, as far as I can tell, 3 members, Sean, Smithy, and Tuck. They address themselves throughout this compilation album. So this is not a studio album, this is just a compilation album. 43 tracks, so much material, covers, originals, skits, so much to take in here. This album in particular came out in, give me 2 seconds.
This album is kind of like finding someone's old home movies. Like,
no, this was 95.
Except it was meant to see the light of day. Like, because they put it out.
This was the year after Dummy. Dummy was new when this album came out.
So, 1995, as June mentioned.
That makes it even funnier, honestly.
Yeah,
that's funny because the picture's hilarious. The album cover is actually kind of hilarious.
So, as June mentioned, it came out in 1995. The band formed in, what I can tell on this Wikipedia page, 1986. And I don't know where the fuck the female vocals play into this, because they're not listed as band members, but they are addressed. So there's a YouTube channel that I found that I think is one of the members of the band that has all their music online with lyrics transcribed and little descriptions of like information about the songs. And on the songs with the female vocals, they talk like they wrote those songs. So it's a mystery. As far as I can tell, this goes back and forth similar to Rezillos with female vocals and male vocals.
Yeah, but the male vocals are way more common than the female vocals.
Right. Well, because it's
43 tracks on here. There are 7 songs that are
9
female vocals.
9 female vocals. I counted it. 9 female vocals.
I don't want to spend too much time on this, but what tracks did you count?
1, Justify Your Book, Poems on the Underground.
No, name the track numbers.
Okay, 1, 2, 9, 14, 23, 24.
I know 40.
35. 36 and 40.
Okay. It's possible I missed a few.
So
it's around 10. It's around 10.
So it's a compilation album. So there's a bunch of stuff here. And it's a little long.
A little?
Yeah. But yeah, this band started in the late 80s, early 90s, novelty punk band. So some comedy, not to be taken too seriously, although lyrically there are some pretty decent punk stuff on here that there
are some serious songs on here.
Yeah, a lot of serious songs actually, and then a lot of goofiness.
A handful.
What saves this thing for me, this is what Meatmen should have been, is like goofy, ridiculous punk, but not racist and homophobic. You know, that's what this should. But so that we get this, you know. I love this thing.
It's like Meatmen, but actually good intention.
Yeah.
And like good humor. So you can't hate it for the comedy it's doing the way that you can hate the Meatmen, because it's like, Jesus Christ, dude, can you try to be any more edgy?
I love this thing. I think most of the humor lands. The female vocals alone sold me, but there's some great moments with the male vocals as well. There's a lot of gold here, I think, but I'll save all my thoughts for later. I cannot wait to hear what Tom has to say about this.
Just want to go straight to Tom, because we've been chazzed a few times.
Yeah.
We've been chazzed so many times.
This is my first experience getting chazzed. So.
Oh, God. There you go.
Tom, what did you think about Wat Tyler's tummy? Kick it off.
I'm wondering whether to lead with whether I actually liked it or not, or build up to that.
Build up. I want to get steamy.
All right, I'll start with my experience putting it on. I mean, first off, obviously, if you see the album cover before you hear the music,
we should describe what that is.
You're going to go into it with a preconceived notion.
Tom, describe the album cover.
It's a parody album cover. So, of course, you're going to expect some kind of parodied comedic music. And then I see the album length, 43 songs, and I'm like, what am I getting in for? And I had a similar experience to you, Chaz, where I listened to the first 2 songs and I'm like, hell yeah, this is just solid, kind of punky, kind of rocky. You mentioned jangle pop. Like, yeah, it's just good music. And then It Makes Me Belch comes on, and I'm like, what the hell have I gotten into? That song takes you by surprise with the guy listing out all the things that makes him belch. But the thing is, the surprises don't stop there. I realized pretty early on, like my first listen, like this is just going to be me wrapping my head around what this album actually is. Because I realized, like, the first couple tracks set a certain expectation, and then that's dashed by song 3. And then by song 5 or 6, you realize, okay, I was just foolish to have any expectations to begin with. Let's just ride this out and see what the next 37 songs have in store for me.
And it is a roller coaster.
At that point, I was just in it for the ride. And I gotta say, to go ahead and play my cards here, I actually really liked this.
Yes!
I liked it. I liked it.
Let's fucking go!
Here's where I'm coming from. I liked it for the same reason that I like Ween's first album.
Yeah.
It's a smattering. It's a smattering of songs that have nothing to do with each other. And in some ways, there were some things that definitely held it back. But in a way, I actually kind of got to the point where, in a sick kind of Stockholm Syndrome type way, I learned to really appreciate, like, just the fact that they don't give a fuck. This is pure irreverence.
Yeah.
But there are enough nuggets of strong musicianship that, like Ween, which, to be clear, this doesn't really sound like Ween. I think it just embodies a lot of the same spirit.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
But like them, they show enough moments of competent musicianship that you realize everything that doesn't fit that mold is deliberate. They're having fun with it, and they're trying to portray a certain kind of, I don't give a fuck mentality. So from there, my complaints are, this is 43 tracks.
Yeah, it's a compilation.
It's definitely a compilation. But also, like, even then, even when you're just taking the let's throw everything at the wall and see what sticks approach, I still feel like there's stuff you could pare down. I mean, they've got multiple versions of the same song on here. I don't feel like that's really necessary. Like,
one song and then the same song in Arabic after.
Which was kind of funny. I think that was deliberate. That was deliberate. I think that was deliberately done.
I think that's deliberate.
Yeah, they're trying to take it to an extreme level, but like, I thought the song "Rude Girl" was funny. I don't need to hear it 3 times.
Yeah,
right. Exactly.
For the most part, what's on here works for what it's trying to do in its kind of underhanded way.
And then you have the female vocals, oh my God, that's the cream of the crop.
They're great. They're great. Yeah. I feel like you could have just separated that into its own experience, into its own album. You could boil it down to like a 25 to 30 minute album.
I have no idea what the connection with the female, because the actual band is the 3 discs.
Yeah.
I don't know what the connection is. I don't know why they're on here.
It's a mystery. Kind of a different sound entirely as well. But because you listen to the first tracks and like,
from what I can find, they wrote. Besides the covers on here of the band Leatherface, which I looked into them, they're like a melodic hardcore shit. Their cover of Not Superstitious is far superior than the original. Because I listened to the original, shitty. Get that shit out of here. Melodic hardcore is like intelligent dance music. It's like, what the fuck? Anyway, that's my hot take on that. But I don't know what the connection is between the female vocal group and here. But I think they're the same people. I don't know. It's just, it's so crazy.
And the thing is, even removing the female vocalist, which is a treat anytime she shows up, which, to be honest, I don't even know if it's the same fucking person every time a female vocalist comes up. But that's why another thing that makes this album so perplexing to me is that you mentioned anywhere online that we can read about this band, it portrays them as this 3-piece band, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But even when the female vocalist isn't in there, it doesn't even sound like the 3 guys through the whole thing to me, which in a way is kind of impressive, and in a way is also kind of confusing and kind of disconnects me from it.
Just to add on to that, maybe because this is a compilation that came out in 95 and they've been a band since like the mid 80s, maybe this is a compilation over like a decade, and maybe their voice kind of changed a little bit, or their presentation kind of changed a little bit.
That's fair.
And that could account for some of that.
I think that's a great point, because most compilations, when you're listening to a compilation, you're familiar with the artist's work. If you're listening to like a greatest hits album, you know where those individual songs are coming from, right? So your brain already knows to recontextualize it as a compilation, as a bunch of disconnected individual tracks that are brought together. The difficult thing here is this is a Wat Tyler compilation, but we don't know the original sources. We don't know when they were from. We don't know what era of the band. There's no original album that these are being pulled from. So when I'm listening to this, and in my brain, because I'm listening to it as one contiguous listen, it feels to me like I showed up at some pub in the UK and this drunk group of like 8 friends and their one competent female musician friend who they bring on for some songs are just putting on a concert for you and fucking around. And every now and then you're like, holy shit, these guys are good. And then they come on and do like a joke sea shanty or a Led Zeppelin parody.
That pirate song is amazing. That pirate song is fucking gold. It's gold.
That's the thing. What they do, they pull off. And then there's like, I got to call out track 26, Song for Guy Fawkes, which is just a gorgeous
great piano ballad.
Tune.
Yeah.
And
so
apparently,
sorry, Tom. You got me hyped because that song is fantastic. That blew me away the first time I heard that song. But they made, apparently, and again, this source could be completely false, but, it's the internet. What can we do? According to this YouTube channel, the little story behind that song is that they composed that for some like other punk compilation, but they hated it so much that they didn't want it. So they like, all right, fuck it, we'll put it on our own, I think. But it's like a beautiful piano ballad. Yeah.
It is. It makes no sense in here, but at the same time makes as much sense as anything else that they decided to put on here. So like, why not? Why not? But like in my mind, when I'm playing this and I'm envisioning this just like rotating cast of people on this pub stage.
Yeah.
Someone drunk gets up and just happens to bang out a beautiful piano tune. Yeah. And then they go from there into something completely irreverent and goofy. And so there's something kind of endearing to me about that, but there are enough moments of real musicianship here that kind of pull me through those lulls.
Another
Fat
one
I really
is a
liked,
big one.
which Fat Wah is good. I really liked My Dead Relation. That actually felt like a Smiths or Blur song to me in some, like in the writing and the way the instrumentation fades in at the beginning. I'm like, there's some cool stuff going on here. And then they just turn it on its head and like, I got to say from there, like I named a couple of my favorite more musical moments on the album. Not Superstitious was my favorite track.
Yeah, facts.
With the female vocalist. She kills it. And then you got that additional acoustic guitar that comes in the chorus, really sells it. Like a lot of thought going into that. My biggest laugh out loud moment was Eternal Triangle, track 31.
Is that the you sir? Surely just. Yeah. Mine was the definitive love song. I laugh every fucking time. Like, and it goes a little something really like good. That. Every time.
That one's pretty good.
Oh man.
Yeah. So other than that, real quick, my least favorite track.
Oh, I bet I know him. I bet I can count them. Yeah.
The 7-minute Masters of the Universe.
What? Tom!
That's the one moment where they really pull me out of it. I'm like, there are some funny moments in there, but
the jump around.
A lot of the funny songs on here, they keep at a tactful like minute average.
Fair.
So 7 minutes of just what sounds like live on stage rambling. I'm like, this song in itself totals the runtime of like 8 other songs on the album, and it's not as valuable.
That's
so
fair.
Like,
yeah,
there are moments like that kind of pull me out of it, but overall, like, I still really enjoyed the thing, as a whole. I've never really heard anything quite like it. They're just throwing everything on the table, and in a way, I kind of have to respect the just the sheer nerve that it takes to do that. And it still was, even outside of that, just like, okay, I respect the just let's go for it attitude. I still did enjoy it, just from a sheer listening perspective.
Oh, Tom
So
Hummer.
there's my hot take.
Ladies and gentlemen, Tom Hummer not only came through, but he oh man, yes. Now, June and Brian, make me sad.
Chaz, you have made Chaz's like year.
Oh, I texted Brian yesterday. Hold on, real quick. I was like, if Tom likes Tummy, then 2020 wasn't that bad of a year. Like, after all, you know, it was all worth it. It was all
personally for Chaz.
Yeah.
No, in general.
Not objectively.
No, objectively, you're not allowed to complain about anything that's happening.
Wow.
Right.
Chaz, when you were introducing this record, when you picked it, you were like, it's kind of weird, it's kind of crazy, but there's some really good stuff here. And I was like, okay. I was very skeptical because Chaz has Chazzed us on several occasions, and I hear the first two songs and it's right up my alley, like something that I would go and seek out and listen to on my own all the time. I listen to a shit ton of stuff like this, just stuff that was recorded by a bunch of women in a basement in the mid 80s with like a punky attitude and just to do whatever the hell you want type of thing. Like, especially with the jangly guitars, like that's another thing that I adore. Those first two songs were absolutely right up my alley, and I genuinely think those are great songs. And then things that make me belch, right? And that's fine. And then the album goes on for another 40 minutes or whatever, 40 songs. It's just very mixed for me. Like, there are moments that I enjoy. There are moments that make me chuckle. But there are also a lot of tracks in the track listing that are just kind of there. They maybe don't make me hate it. They don't bother me, but they're just kind of there. So you end up with an album where the highs are really solid, the lows are just whatever, and there's more lows than highs. Mm-hmm. In my opinion, it's very disjointed. I mean, like we said, you could put all of the different songs of different styles off of this thing. You could make 4 completely different EPs. Mm-hmm. You have like a jokey, folky EP. You have like the female vocalist doing a punky jangle pop, like C86 type thing. And then you've got like the straight up like hard punk rockin' tracks. And then whatever the hell else remains, makes for the last one. This was fine. It was an enjoyable enough listen. I didn't hate it. I didn't even really dislike it, but it's not something that I'm going to want to come back to. It's not really something that I'm all excited about. I think in terms of funny, irreverent punk music, there's just better stuff out there, in my opinion. I don't know. For me, this record, there's just not a lot to say about it because it's what you see is what you get. There's not a lot of like listening to this record for the 5th and 6th time and getting something new every time. It's you listen to it a couple times and you understand what you have. And for me, like I left with mildly positive but overall relatively mixed opinion.
Mostly negative. Sorry. I will say what I liked first. I want to say the Ween debut is such an apt comparison because that was actually my first experience with Ween, was the debut for this show. And I remember at the time, I just was so floored by how the beautiful mess that it was. And there's still a lot of tracks in there that are a lot of fun. And, it's no secret that Ween has a lot of personality. Not to get bogged down talking about Ween, but that release has definitely grown off of me for the reasons that it's not as tight or as like fully realized. Like, it's very much seeing what sticks. A lot of ideas, some work, some don't. I mean, Limb Lip, one of my favorite Ween songs, is a ridiculous Prince parody with very graphic lyrics. It's a very vulgar song, but it's so, the humor shines through on that track so much. And also, they're pretty capable musicians. Here, I don't like most of the humor. I do like the shanty tracks that show up after things makes me belch. Hops and Barley and Coming Home. This like weird, and there's a few like weird shanties on here, but those are just funny. Like, I just do find them funny, and they're actually pretty good songs. I don't really like the crowd noise that comes in.
It's on Hops and Barley.
Right, yeah.
So the backstory behind that is apparently that there's another version of this song somewhere that's much better. This is like the one that we will not show, but they released on a compilation. Apparently the backstory behind that is that they tried to get a live pub sound, but the audio quality was just so bad. Like, that's why that...
It's really terrible.
It's awful, yeah. And they know it's awful. They know it's bad.
So, yeah, those tracks are kind of good. I think there's actually a really good run of tracks from like tracks 12 through 12 through 16, with 15 being the exception. It's this terrible, and there's one or two like this where they just do this yelling bit in the middle of, or I'm sorry, James Whale actually is the one that has there's so much on the album. James Whale is one of the ones where they're yelling is interspersed throughout the track, and I think it's just so horrible. Like, it's just so unpleasant and unfunny for me that to the point where I would skip these on later listens. I would just skip through them because I really they were just I don't want to say upsetting, but I didn't really like them, and they were so unpleasant, and the runtime is so long that I would rather hear the more realized tracks or just even some of the other jokes a little bit more. I like my favorite track was Real Shocks. It's a minute and change, but it has a lot of change ups in it. It kind of reminds me of some of my favorite Ice Age songs in that it's pretty intensely played, but they kind of go into this more melodic part. Fat Wah, another really good track.
Dude, the lyrics on that is one of their best. I love the lyrics.
Wasn't worth being on here twice, but that riff's good. That riff's really good. The only song I thought was worth being on here twice was actually My Dead Relation, because I really don't like the first cut at all, the first version of it we hear, but the one that comes later in the album is actually really good. The problem is, I mean, that's really it. Everything else is kind of bottom of the barrel for me, and like it kind of works in that there's 43 tracks, and I don't really feel the length until I'm at like track 30. Like, it's really not unbearable.
I think it flowed for a compilation album. I think the flow of it is surprisingly not too bad.
It's for 43 tracks and being just this huge, basically mess. It's not too bad as far as like listening all the way through it. I would usually take a break just because it's a lot to absorb. Yeah, I agree. Masters of the Universe is pretty unbearable, and actually after I had heard it once through, I didn't actually even bother to listen to it again. It's just to me it was like a waste of time. I don't think the banter is charismatic. I know that's really mean.
I disagree.
The banter is just not charismatic. It's like I can't even really understand what's going on necessarily. He's basically like throwing out a lot of jokes that just don't really land for me. There's a little bit of playing, but I don't really like it. The last 3 tracks are awful. Just the worst, like some of the worst parts of the album. Which is the third time they do Rude Girl a third time.
Yeah.
Which is just a bit fucking much. Even though that's one of the funnier moments on here is the first time they do Rude Girl. It's just, such a good shit post. I can't help but like it. But, it wasn't good enough to do it 2 more times. And the Little People Make Love is, I mean, come on. Like, if you enjoy this track, more power to you. If you think it's funny, more power to you.
Which track?
I was cringing a little bit. I don't really think it's very good. It's like a long, not funny skit. Fuck Pump is actually the last female vocal track we get on here. Not my favorite of that batch of like her songs, right? Of the songs she's fronting
And
on.
the thing is, like, me and Tom and Chaz have all mentioned her tracks being the ones that we like kind of the most or are among our favorites. But that style in general, like, historically hasn't really been your thing, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't hook me as much as it does.
I mean, Brian,
but I still think it was some of my favorite tracks on there was her songs, Not Superstitious. That was a great cut of hers.
Yes.
And my other favorite one was Our Wedding.
Yes,
really
one of the catchiest songs on here. One of the catchiest songs on here.
Everything else I was kind of indifferent to. So you get Fuck Pump, and then you get to the last 3, and it's this awful Satanist skit that's like there's yelling at the end. It's like it's just
very middle school.
It was very I love it though.
I don't want to say like juvenile because like some of the juvenile stuff is kind of funny, but this was like this into Steven Do into a crappy song for a crappy compilation is like a very insufferable like 3 minutes.
You big baby.
Personally,
it's not that bad.
I know I tend to be. I've been kind of harsh maybe with some of the Pixies or some of my critiques, but, if I were like going to dance around it, I would just say, hey, it's, I'd be like, oh, it's okay or whatever. But honestly, this thing, kind of sucks. And it's not the worst thing I've ever heard. And honestly, like as far as some of the worst stuff which is all Chaz that I've had to listen to this time around, for better or worse, there's been some pretty good stuff too. And, it's not that the conversations haven't been good. They've all been interesting at the very least. This one is maybe the one that's like, I know when we reviewed the Chipmunks thing first, right? The whatever that was called, was the slowed down Chipmunks song.
Sludgefest.
I know that I remember saying there that like I felt like it was like a waste of time to listen to it. I don't think that now, and at first I thought that about this, but I don't really think that now. It certainly is kind of interesting, but at the end of the day, it's really for me just like a mostly bad compilation of friends who probably really enjoyed themselves and really aren't that bad. Like, it's really not terrible, but, you know, it is still bad. So I don't know. There's a couple of good songs on here, but I'll basically never come back to it. It doesn't really have any staying power, anything that's so memorable about it that I would even say it's worth checking out. It's really just it's one of those musical things that's just buried in the internet, and we happen to unearth it and talk about it here. This is going to sound so mean, but this is one of those things that you dig up and it's like, this wasn't really worth it. So, well, yeah, I didn't really like it all that much. I didn't really enjoy it. It's not the worst thing we've ever done for the show, which is surprising given the just amount of stuff that's here. Sometimes the humor did come through. Sometimes the good songs came through, but mostly not. Mostly not that. So I wasn't a big fan, even though I do think there are some qualities, like saying it was like the Ween debut. I thought it was a really good point because I did like that album. I just think the difference here is the Ween one had some funnier and better ideas on it. And this one, you know, they're not really the same at all. But and this one was just more of a mess, you know. And the thing about that first Ween album, it blew my mind at the time. Just, you know, it's one of those new musical experiences you have that really sticks with you. But as time has gone on, I kind of greener pastures for me personally with Ween and beyond. So and you know, this was kind of like it's like a tundra as opposed to a greener pasture.
So I think there's just so much gold buried in this treasure trove, you know. Some amazing covers and originals and a lot of hilarious stuff, I think. I mean, you guys know my sense of humor. Like, I can be very lowbrow with the best of them. It's all about context. And, you know, songs like Smells Like Dog Poo make me laugh my ass off. You know, the dumb caveman humor. And it's not racist or homophobic, so that's a big plus. With songs like Fat Wall, that's like fuck Nazis and fuck you for hating fat women.
That's
it's
sort of like
it's like hell yeah.
It's sort of like but that's like a bare minimum is to not be that. I can't award points for decent humanity. If that, every album would be so great.
I think out of 43 tracks, I think most of the stuff here is pretty memorable, for better, for worse, regardless, depending on your experience. There's a few weak tracks that I'm like, you know, just enjoy them when they're on, but I'm not, like, whatever. The highs here are just so fucking high. And for a compilation album with 43 tracks, that's pretty damn impressive. With a decent flow, to say the least. I mean, I think it is long and definitely slogs near the back half, but I mean, for Christ's sake, most compilation albums are like, not that. So I think that's pretty impressive and I think deserves some merit. I think the production is stellar. Love how the guitars sound. Love the use of acoustic guitar in some of the covers and female tracks. Not superstitious. I mean, that acoustic guitar riff that comes in on the chorus is just so great. Absolutely great. And I love how most of the instruments sound. I think the production on this thing is pretty great for what it is, for a lot of the demos on here. The multiple version of songs, yeah, that is a bummer. Like, they should just pick the best version and stuck with it. But it's a compilation. We're just throwing it all in there, like Tom and Brian have said. Just
they
seeing what sticks.
obviously did it on purpose as a joke.
I think so too, with some of the ways.
Yeah. One song, and then the very next track, we had the exact same song played the exact same way in
with a different language. It's hilarious. That's hilarious. That's hilarious. Yeah. The fucking female vocals, I cannot praise enough. It's just stunning how it's like that's on the same thing as this. And I would love to know who they are and like what they've gone on to do, but I don't think there's any information about them on the internet. Just the male guys, which sucks because there's some of the cream of the crop here. So there's a lot of flaws here, but I mean, just for 43 tracks, over an hour long, with so much material, I mean, light to decent 8. I love this thing. And it was such a pleasant surprise. And it's still, I will never forget that musical moment of seeing that album cover, laughing my ass off, and then listening to the first 2 tracks and going, hold up, wait a minute, this is good? Oh, like, whoa. And then makes me belch. I was like, all right, there it is. We're back. Tom, make me happy again.
I'm actually going to meet you right there at a light to decent 8. That's where I'm sitting for this one.
Let's fucking go.
All right.
Yeah.
This is up my alley. This is, you know, like one of you mentioned, I apologize, I don't remember who, but like this is not the kind of joke you want to come back to. Like, I would listen to this again for the same reason that I've seen Billy Madison and Tommy Boy a million times in my life. You know? Like, I love the dumb humor. I acknowledge that there is nothing profound about it.
Based on this,
every now and then you need to have dessert for dinner.
If I had,
that's how I feel about it.
If I had to predict, based on your reaction, if Jake was on this, he would have absolutely hated it, given the dynamic here. Jake would have absolutely hated this.
I should make him listen to it and just see and get his reaction.
Yeah.
Don't tell them where you got it from either. Just, hey, I found this album.
I tried to look up Tyler
really
Childers.
good.
Use my excuse. You tried to find Tyler Childers' new album and misspelled it and found this instead. Like, just use that.
I'm confident in saying he would laugh his ass off at it. Knowing,
Okay.
I mean, he's got an even goofier sense of humor than I do.
Yeah.
He's off the wall. So I
Let's
think that he would
go.
find it really funny.
Dude, Tom, you killed it, man. That's
I
awesome.
feel like I've fallen into like an alternate dimension.
Me and Brian can just like burst some bubbles here. It's like a strong
Bring it
five.
back down. Strong
Yeah,
five.
I like that point about dessert for dinner. I think that's a very, the optimist in me can totally see that. I bet to make this was a blast, because everyone cracks a joke that they laugh at, and then you look over, at like whoever, like a buddy, significant other, you're like, wasn't that funny? And they just are like in shock and like disgusted with you. And so
That's what I do.
I can definitely admire that aspect of it. But yeah, I didn't enjoy it. I'd go with like a light 4. I wasn't really into it at all. It's a mostly
Really
negative
see the
experience.
merit of this
There's a lot of stuff I just skip because I can't hardly stand it. But that feels a little mean spirited, but it's not. I just don't enjoy it. It's fine. Clearly everyone else likes it, or thinks it's funny, and I think parts of it are funny too. Dessert for dinner. I could totally see that too. Just not for me. Just not made for me. I'm maybe a little more pedestrian. I kind of just like when I go to like albums or LPs, like, if there's humor in them, that's fine. But I also need like some good songs, and really neither landed with me for the majority of this thing. But it does have some pretty good stuff on it. So, if you're curious, if you're really curious, listen to it. Otherwise, don't. The album I picked is the third album release from Janet Jackson of the Jackson family.
Did not know that. Had no idea that she was Michael Jackson's sister. Absolutely had none of that context.
This is her going off into her solo career, and it feels like for the first time, because there are 2 records that precede this one that, to use an industry term here, didn't do well or make money or sound good. So the significance of this release and its title is her firing Joe Jackson, her father, as their manager, and moving out on her own efforts. And there are 2 notable producers on this album who are credited with kind of bringing this really the sounds of danceable, very sassy, and very a term that I'm not familiar with outside of this album, honestly. It's very New Jack Swing flavor, which is kind of this fusion of hip hop elements with R&B elements and soul elements.
It's like dance pop with hip hop production a little bit.
Synth
And
pop,
I mean,
yeah.
hip hop
Like-
production circa 1986, not like it's not boom bap. It's like electro. It's like early.
Yeah, it's a little, I guess you could say it's cheesier. I don't really necessarily see that quality of it, but I guess that would be maybe how some people see it if I were trying to give you an idea. Very danceable, though. The 2 producers on this thing, who are apparently a legendary production duo who I am very limited knowledge of going into this release. I just wanted to go back because I've heard Velvet Rope, which is seen to be her creative and artistic peak by a lot of people. But I wanted to kind of go back to the beginning before I did like a Rhythm Nation or something else that was really well known, and kind of get to the first one. Where did we start? So the production duo is Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. And I guess they're responsible for a lot of the really good production on this album, which it's a great quality. It's one of the best qualities about the album. So they're definitely worth mentioning here if they're worth mentioning elsewhere. So she's on her own, and she's working with these new producers out from under the control of her father as her manager. And that comes across in a lot of the lyrics too. And a lot of the lyrics here are about having control of one's artistic direction, one's own body autonomy. And there are some love songs as well on here. And I think the majority of the album really is about love. A lot of the tracks on here, especially When I Think of You. He Doesn't Know I'm Alive, which is a love-centric song, but isn't necessarily, a traditionally, I guess, a love song. It's just love is involved. And then 2 closing tracks, too. But it starts off more in that control with literally the title track of this thing kind of being like a mission statement for this new direction for Janet. And it's a pretty good track. It's not my favorite here, but it's a pretty good track. It is a really good start to the record and is a great thesis statement for everything you're going to hear. Nasty is maybe the most like sassy, like badass song on here. Very much like about body autonomy, kind of a track that came to Janet after being catcalled at on the street, and her having to have this kind of altercation with someone where she stood up to this man, and you can just feel the energy of that. You know, her standing up for herself on this track. I love the little bit where she's like, "It's Miss Jackson if you're nasty." She is one of my favorite things about Janet is she has this badass energy, but it's just so reserved. It's just very much like, really with the theme of this album, is just very in control. It's very authoritative, but in a way that's mixed in so seamlessly with these like danceable beats, and these really layered as well, like these elements of hip hop and R&B production coming together, and some of the soul elements too, which I don't necessarily see a lot of that here. Maybe for the last two tracks, which are kind of, I would say, very different from everything else before them in terms of tone and tempo and everything. So there are a couple of songs on here too that are about Janet's place in like a relationship. I don't know if it's what she's in at the time. It definitely seems informed by that with "What Have You Done For Me Lately" and "He Doesn't Know I'm Alive." And to a degree, "The Pleasure Principle," which are kind of songs about like, you know, to put it into a sentence that maybe describes it is, you know, you're my significant other and I'm your significant other. This is an equal parts relationship. And those songs to me are kind of about like trying to get your share, not being paid attention to enough necessarily, or not feeling like you have enough attention paid to you, or, you know, enough courtesy taken to you in a relationship. "You Can Be Mine" is like this, it's pretty catchy. When I first heard it, I wasn't super crazy about it, but it's kind of grown on me a little bit. It's just a little long, and that's maybe a problem I have with a couple of the tracks here, is they do kind of have a long runtime.
Okay.
And they don't necessarily change up enough for me to really enjoy the back half as much. Now, that's not the case for some of them, but it is like "Nasty" is one that definitely has throughout the whole thing. "What Have You Done For Me Lately?" The last two tracks, I love basically the whole of those tracks, but "You Can Be Mine" and "The Pleasure Principle" is maybe my least favorite song. It's just a little too...
love that song.
It's not impressionistic or anything like that. It's just not as well put together, not as memorable. It's a little too stripped back for my taste on this album. And "When I Think of You" has just a great little vocal melody on it for the refrain. But is another one that sort of doesn't leave a huge impression on me. So I guess to me, to summarize my thoughts on this album, because they're not very complex, my thoughts on this album, to be honest. I think Janet really carves out a good identity for herself here as this first record. I think a lot of this stuff you see on "To the Velvet Rope," I wouldn't be surprised if you see it throughout. I think she really is extremely talented, has great taste, basically. Has really great taste. Everything on here is super... There's no part that sounds bad, really. It's all very smooth. It's all very crisp production-wise, and that doesn't really... You know, sometimes I prefer things like a little bit rougher, but honestly, I just love how clean this thing is and how purposely everything is placed and how well it all comes together a majority of the time. Having heard what she would go on to do, though, I guess this thing just pales in comparison for me as a listening experience, which isn't a fair critique. This came first. You know, I'm basically working backwards here. So if I'm trying to remove that context of knowing the later stuff is way better and having heard it first and coming to this one, this is really solid debut. Like, I think another debut I've listened to recently is like the Bad Religion debut, their debut album. And my favorite thing about that album was when I heard it was like, I'm so excited to hear the rest, because this, to me, without having experience with that other stuff first, which is usually where you go, is the more essential stuff. You can kind of get excited to work through the discography when you go from the beginning. And if you like that first one, I mean, you're probably going to love the other stuff even more. And this to me is kind of that situation. With this and the Bad Religion debut, I just see so much potential. And I know it's realized for Janet. So I know it's worth going through everything else. I just think here we're just getting the start. And my main critique of this album is I would just love more of everything. And we go on to get it later. We just don't get it on this album. And having the context of that, I'm trying not to let it inform that, but it really did when I was listening to it now. I think on subsequent listens, I was able to maybe get rid of that baggage a little bit and understand it's really good. I mean, Janet's singing is beautiful. A lot of the songwriting works most of the time. It's just some of it's a little long. I think certain tracks like "The Pleasure Principle" and the middle section, like "You Can Be Mine When I Think of You," even though those songs are pretty good, I think they're just a little underwhelming compared to everything. And other than that, though, sleek production, great vocals. Janet's a great performer. she has a lot of great ideas that translate well into the songs that she writes, and that's pretty much how I feel about this whole album. I don't think I have anything else to say.
Yeah, Brian, I agreed with a lot of like conceptually, what you set that up with. It's really neat where this album sits in Janet's discography, because like you said, the first two albums are kind of write-offs, right? Like she was like a teenager who didn't really have a lot of autonomy over her created product. But then also looking forward from here, when you look at albums like Rhythm Nation and Velvet Rope, she jumps from this to like hour-plus long albums that are much more conceptual. And I kind of like where this sits in her discography, that it's just this nice little tight 9-track, very song by song, punchy record. So that's really cool. This album is actually the one I've been the most excited to talk about tonight, because I had a really interesting personal experience with it. Sometimes I'll listen to an album and I don't really understand my own reaction to it. So I have to like dig into like analyze myself. Like, why do I feel this way about it? Why am I having this experience? So I'd love to, if you'll indulge me, share that experience with you, because it kind of, this was a really cool moment that I don't get to have a lot of. But for context, by the way, the reason I set it up that way is because I have some very specific nitpicks about this album that I don't want it to come off as like, I'm just sitting here trying to find any reason to rag on this album, right? It's not like that. It's more like, I don't like this as much as I feel like I should, and I want to know why. Like, I want to dig into what is driving that, what's happening in the music that I'm hearing that's at a like emotional level, not allowing me to connect to it in a way that I feel like I should at a more intellectual level. So here's my story. I'll try to make this not too long. But first time I listened to this, similar to the Rezillos album, I was listening to Tony Hawk, or playing Tony Hawk. I actually like listening to albums for the first time in the background, because otherwise I feel like I get caught up too much in the details. I just want to get a sense for what the general sound is so that I know what to expect. And then on my future listens, I can start, I've seen the big picture, and I can start seeing all the little tiles that make up the mosaic of that big picture. So that's where I started with this. And my first couple listens, I was like, I'm just not really digging this. And I wondered, like, is it just because it's that 80s New Jack Swing kind of dated pop sound? But then I thought about it more, and I'm like, well, no, because I like a lot of stuff from that era. I like hip hop from that era. I like R&B in general. I like Run DMC and EPMD and Eric B. and Rakim. Like, I feel like there's some of the instrumentals and the beat focus, the production there is not too different from this and from that era. So I'm like, what is it about this that is not lining up for me? It wasn't till I listened to this, just blasting it in my car, which a good context to listen to this album, because all the drums are so punchy, the bass is so percussive and punchy, and the vocals come in a little bit clearer there too. So I was really jamming out to it in my car, and I was starting to like it a bit better. But what I realized is that I was really gravitating toward the back half of this album, where things get a little bit more R&B and a little more lush. The first 3 or 4 tracks are harder hitting, they're more rhythm focused. And then as you get to the back half of the album, there are more kind of lush instrumentals, more keyboards kind of holding chord progressions down and stuff like that. And that's when I realized the reason I was really struggling with the front half of this album is when you listen to it, it's so stark. There are so many moments, so much of those tracks are all you're hearing pretty much is drums, bass, but it's like this really percussive synth bass where it's more about the attack than the tone, and Janet's vocals. And so that's when I realized, like, oh, that's why I like hip hop that has this kind of sound, because the vocals are more rhythm focused as well. So it kind of lines up with the beat. But the thing that a lot of hip hop artists did from this era is they would always have these like underlying like light chords and instrumental melodies underneath them, because everything else about the music was so rhythmic. In this, it's like you have the rhythm of the drums and bass, and Janet's vocals are really the only thing melodic that's going on. I mean, you'll have bits and pieces, like Nasty is a great example. You have that da 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 da, it's great when that comes in, but those are fleeting moments in that track, and the rest of that track is basically just Janet singing over a beat. And for me, there's no gel in the middle to tell me why that melody should be sung over that rhythm. It starts to feel a little bit arbitrary because and this is, once again, very personal to me, a lot of my favorite musical moments are those where you have like a melody that's going and then a chord will shift under it. And it makes you hear that melody so differently because the context, the harmonic context in which you're hearing that melody just makes you listen to it differently. There's not much opportunity here for that when it's just a melody and a beat, and the rhythm in the melody doesn't even really match the beat. So it's kind of like, what was the artistic decision to put this melody over this beat or put this beat under this melody? It was feeling to me like two factors, two variables of the music that were just kind of there arbitrarily together, but not necessarily gelling. And once I got past that, though, and especially that's why I realized I like the later songs a little bit better, because once you get to like Pleasure Principle, When I Think of You, you hear actual chords being played on like a keyboard or something that are sitting underneath the vocals. And then I'm like, oh, okay, this is what key this is in. This is where the underlying chord movements are moving to. And this is how Janet's choosing to sing over them. These are the notes in those chords that she's choosing to highlight in her vocal melodies. And that's why there was such a disparity there. So once again, I'm not trying to nitpick here, because actually once I realized that that was why I was having this reaction, I kind of got past it. And I was kind of like, okay, well, this is how the music is, though. They did this by design. And I could kind of just get more into the intensity of her vocals and appreciate all the layers that she was doing there. I especially love in What Have You Done For Me Lately, like the little ooze after she sings the title of the song, the harmonies there.
The keyboard riff there, yeah, that's sick.
Those moments are great, but I was having a lot of time connecting to it for that reason. Once I really wrapped my head around the full album, though, what I realized is, to me, there aren't any songs on here that I just go gaga over. I'm not like, oh my gosh, I love this track. But there's also not a weak track to me. I think this is just 9 really quality songs. And while I still favor the back half, I think that more lush R&B sound just feels a little more complete to me. I also, respect the fact that she was doing something a little different on those early tracks on the album. And also, as you mentioned, Brian, I just like the attitude. I like that she can present several different personas that can be empowering, but also be vulnerable. It's a really cool, just kind of complete package from that standpoint. So anyways, thank you for indulging my long story there.
So,
but to get into the music, that's how I was feeling about it.
Well, Tom, I love you, man, because I'm really riding that high, but I completely disagree with you on
really.
The front half is where this album shines for sure, while the back half is great R&B. I agree, though, that every song is quality. Not a single bad track, super consistent. I think we can all agree on that, because this is a well-made album. However, I get where you're coming from, though, Tom, but goddamn is the production on this thing not the greatest thing in the entire universe. Holy shit. The 2 guys who produced this are legends for a reason, even though I don't know their fucking name.
Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis.
Okay, Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis.
And many other great guests. Yes. There were a few others, but those are the main 2.
Janet's vocals are superb. For me, what kind of brings this down a bit, while I do love this record, is, again, lyrics kind of meh, except for the first 2 tracks with Control and Nasty.
I don't know.
With Control and Nasty, that's like, okay, I kind of like the lyrical content here, but it's a lot of love songs that are just like, just really don't do anything for me like the first half does. Because like Pleasure Principle, I think that's when the lyrics that are like lovey-dovey get some character to them. She's really flirty and confident. It's like, yeah, okay, I can get behind this. But with songs like He Doesn't Know I'm Alive or Let's Wait a While, it's like, we've heard this shit before. Like, we've all heard this kind of stuff. It's like late 80s, early 90s R&B, obviously. The drums are fucking killer on this thing. Like, that's the cream of the crop on this thing. And is the first half with those drum productions. I love just her vocals over on top of that. My biggest complaint is, and Brian, you touched on this, 85% of the songs in here go on way too goddamn long. And that is the biggest complaint I've had with Janet Jackson forever. Like, I love Rhythm Nation, but like, I mean, that title track, 5+ minutes, is like, this does not need to be
And she really
I
does,
think
not
the
to cut you off.
reason- Well, I think there's an explanation for that. Probably is that this show is probably played in clubs a lot.
Yeah,
You know,
that's
this New
fair.
Jack Swing sound, like this is big. Like this is dance music.
Right.
So having these little like extra like minute and a half to 2 minutes of the jam of the instrumental,
And that's fine.
at the end of most.
But
tracks
that's
here,
what-
that's
that's
just
what-
for dancing and jamming out to. I think.
That's what club mixes, radio edits are for. Like, but this is the actual album, and almost every song in here is like, this should have ended like 2 minutes ago. What the fuck? Like, that's my biggest complaint.
I don't
Even though-
agree to some extent, but I don't like feel as strongly. I guess.
Well, it's just like, I noticed that a lot, and you guys know that Track Links and I have a very complicated relationship. I just think, because Brian made a great point, it's not like they're doing anything in these extended jams that make it warranted to go the length that it does. It's just the same beat the whole time.
They
There's
don't
no-
really change that much.
Yeah, so if you're not going to change it up, don't make it that long. Like, if you're going to do that, do something with it. You know, that's my biggest thing. But
And that's when Tom mentioned earlier that this album is better the louder it is. Like I listened to it in the car driving home for Thanksgiving, listening to it loud and like having that extra 2 minutes to kind of just groove, you know.
well, yeah.
That was cool with me. Like I agree that like structurally I wish that there was like a new keyboard riff that would, or like some kind of different melody that was able to help the tracks ride out to their end. But it doesn't really particularly bother me. Like I think that the beats and the grooves are good enough on their own that I don't hate or even dislike the fact that
Right.
they go on a little longer. than
I guess that's
you
just
think they would.
that is a problem I've had with Janet Jackson's music for a long time. And it's like, of course it's here at the beginning where it all started. Like, I feel like that's just a part of her character. Long songs, like 5+ fucking minute songs throughout the
Yeah,
entire...
and in her later records as well. Like I noticed with the Velvet Rope, a lot of the tracks, go long. I think it's they're enveloping like a lot of the songs that she makes on that album, and here I think they're pretty enticing, like kind of not necessarily hypnotic, but the grooves are good. They're tight.
Yeah.
They played. There's nothing really wrong with them.
I mean,
They just go on a little too long, and that's kind of how I feel similar about even some of the songs in the Velvet Rope. Is I think it's just part of her songwriting style.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I guess I could take it or leave it, but it does.
at least
it
she's consistent.
really doesn't
If
do
that's what she's going to
harm,
do, she does
honestly.
it. If she's going to do that, she does it well. I mean, like, I just don't agree with that.
Oftentimes it works out. I think it's a small critique.
Yeah.
It doesn't kill songs for me. It's just that they're all a little
And it
bit-
doesn't for me
in
either.
context of an album.
It's just
Especially this album might hurt it a little bit.
right.
I actually like the front half of his record the best. And while it's true what Tom said that there's not a lot of choral movement in those first few tracks, I think that those tracks are mostly riding on the quality and intensity of Janet's vocals. The lyrics that are on those first like 4 songs, mostly about just taking control of your own actions in life. The very first song, some of the lyrics specifically mention, my father made all my decisions.
Mm-hmm.
My mother tried to mold me into being like her, but now I've got control.
Not control. Control. That's what she's got.
Right.
Right. And I think that the strength of these songs rides on that energy and that presence that Janet brings, but also on something that we've touched on a little bit, the goddamn keyboard melodies.
The
They're
production.
repetitive,
Oh.
yes. They only show, like, they're usually the same melody throughout most of the songs, or even, for example, the control a little bit on the title track from the background vocals.
Ba-da-ba-da. Yeah.
It's those little, like, that has to be so good because it has to go through the entire track, basically. And it basically does, right? It goes for the whole, like, 5.5 minutes. You have that little control, and that's the thing that you remember the most from that song.
Mm-hmm.
For example, on Nasty, the keyboard, right, that goes on the entire 4 minutes. And I think that this album actually succeeds in having those keyboard and background vocal little flourishes be so goddamn catchy and memorable that it almost makes the song. Like, if the song didn't have that, you would kind of just have Janet singing over these beats and they might not have the same level of flavor and excitement. But those keyboards are just so sassy and melodic that for me personally, like just the keyboards alone kind of warrant the way that everything is structured.
Mm-hmm.
As Tom mentioned, just a little bit like there's somewhat of a gulf between the vocals, the main melody of the track, and the beat. But I think bridges that gulf for me. Whereas with Tom, I think on the latter half of the album, it's the keyboard chords and the chord progressions. For me, what bridges the gulf is the keyboard and background vocal little melodies that are often repeated, and just the general attitude where her vocals are able to match the attitude of the beat. For me, that is the glue that holds those first 4 or so tracks together.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, my favorite song on this record, I think, is You Can Be Mine.
Huh.
I love the verses. I love the energy and the melodies of da 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 da.
Yeah, that shit's awesome. Yeah,
that's a good point.
It's super catchy, super high energy. The high note is stellar. And I don't, for some reason, like on Rate Your Music, it's not one of the higher rated tracks, but for me, that was one of the most exciting moments on the record. I don't think it's a perfect record, and a lot of the flaws that we've brought up, like a little bit too long, maybe a little bit too sparse at times, they're there, but I don't know, man, like this was a really fun record, and I did enjoy my time.
I could also see the necessity of making this thing long. This is her spiritual debut.
Yeah.
This is the real debut, kind of. I can respect the fact of taking time as opposed to having a shorter release, you know?
Right.
Because while maybe the tracks do go on a little bit long, I think all the songs are pretty good. I mean, this thing's totally worth the listen.
Absolutely.
I do think the age shows a little bit.
Fuck no.
The
nope.
dance.
Nope.
Like,
this thing is 80s to the this thing is 80s as it gets, and it's beautiful. You don't hit me with that Zoomer shit, Brian. The 80s makes this thing.
That'd be Boomer, though. No, it'd be Zoomer. You're right. You're right.
The 80s flair of this thing is what gives it so much character. You can't have the drums like that anywhere but in the fucking 80s, and it's beautiful. Like,
I just kind of prefer a little more.
There's no trap
what
hi-hats.
What she would go on to do is, I think what she would go on to do later was a little more timeless, a little better.
To be perfectly fair, I kind of understand where the people who like lived through the 80s and were like, oh my god, 80s production are coming from. Because if you look at like every major indie rock release in the past like 5 years, and Tom, you probably agree with me, the drums are so flat. The drums are so like quiet and they don't have any impact.
It's like there was one room mic set up to just capture everything, and that's it.
So I totally get that. Like, god damn, the gated drums. Like, looking back on the 80s now, like that's not all I'm listening to. But if you were living in that era, and every single release that came out, every post-punk release, every hip-hop release, every dance release, everything that was coming out besides like hardcore punk and metal had that like drum sound, I can understand getting tired of it, even if in 2020 as, you know, a 23-year-old, I can look back not having lived through the 80s and be like, hell yeah, gated drum sounds awesome sometimes.
I'm just a sucker for cheese, and this is some nice Monterey Jack that I'm going to eat up every day, you know?
I think it's pretty good. I was definitely more positive on it, listening to it more. You know, I think it delivers, but I think it has a little more potential than it does deliver on. And that's just, and it kind of, you know, just knowing that is fulfilled later on. I don't look too fondly on this thing, even though I do like it. So I'm going to run like a light 7 on this thing. It's good. It's good. Okay. And there's some really good Janet Jackson songs on here, but I think it's an album of highlights.
Light 8.
Light 8?
Fun as hell, light 8.
I'm going to go with a decent to strong 8 because the quality here is superb. It's just, if you were to shorten all the tracks just a little bit, elevate a little bit, and I think lyrically maybe a little bit of more character would have helped. But I mean, the production, her vocals, her confident attitude, her taking control, quite literally, of her life, and just kicking all that ass. I mean, yeah, this is a classic.
I'm going to go with a light 8 on this one. I ended up really enjoying it. Definitely one that I'll come back to just for the strength of the songs.
Well, that wraps up this episode. Thank you so much for joining us, Tom.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks a lot for having me.
Fun as hell.
Yeah, Tom, all you three.
Tom, if you're down, we will definitely have you on the show again if you're down.
Yeah.
If you or Jake or both of you want to,
I want to try and get both of you at the
show,
same time, just to pick one album.
I'll reach out.
Yeah.
I'll reach out to him, and sometime in the future, I'm sure we can get that set
Yeah,
up.
like we'll
give you some time.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun.
Thanks a lot for having me. This has been a lot of fun. It's always just great to chat with fellow music enthusiasts, and you all are very good at what you do.
Oh, thank you.
This is a really cool concept, and you all interact well together and have great points. So it feels good to be talking with like-minded people. And yeah, thanks a lot for inviting me.
For sure, dude.
It was our
Absolutely.
pleasure.
Yeah.
It was our pleasure.
Oh, and real quick, June, I'm forever indebted to you for that Adrian Lenker song.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, there it is.
You hit me with that at just the right time. So thank you for bringing that up.
Anna and Elizabeth as well. I feel like I have that claim to fame. Mother in the Graveyard by Anna and Elizabeth.
Oh, yeah, that was yours too. Oh,
yeah.
Too. I remember that night. I was having a shitty work night, and I had it on repeat.
But see,
I was like, yes, this is my jam right now.
June didn't bring Tummy by Wat Tyler. Like,
it's
like if I can go back until like 14-year-old me and be like, you're going to be on a music talking podcast with Tom Hummer. I'd be like, whoa.
That means a lot. It means a lot.
Like I said, Tom, if you're ever free, we'll give you some time. Like, don't want to bug you, but I'll hit you up again on Discord and be like, hey, want to come on an episode? And we'll make it happen.
Yeah, that sounds good. And thank you all for picking albums that I had not heard and really ended up enjoying. Thanks for turning me on to new stuff. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
It's the beauty of the show.
Part of the show.
Yeah.
I'm glad we could get you in on that. And thank you for Fishmans, because it's one of those things where it's like I would have heard it eventually. I don't know though how long, So that's awesome, and it's so good too.
So next episode is another regular episode where anything goes. And because I know Brian has been getting a little burnt out on the punk rock and the new wave and that kind of stuff, and has also been more interested in exploring the classics, I figured let's go with a classic jazz record. My personal favorite jazz record, Karma, by Pharoah Sanders, released in 1969.
Okay. Well, boys and girls, it's time. We are going to do Salvo's debut, Off the Charts. For those of you who don't know, Salvo is the reunion. How do I say it? Reunion?
Reunited members of Pain.
Reunited members of Unwarranted Music Opinions fan favorite band, Pain. Dan, Adam, most of the original members. Unfortunately, Mike Pose is not on it because he's teaching. But it's fucking great. It is fucking great. And I can't wait to talk about Pain again, but with this new twist of Salvo. And they're actually coming out with another record really soon. They've started recording that, so I can't wait to just talk about Salvo from here on out. But this is basically the end of a long arcing story that I really hope ends well, because I know Full Speed Ahead wasn't the best, but I think this one will make up for that.
I'm going with an artist that is a classic artist for sure. Has some of the best live albums ever recorded, but I think a lot of people listen to those two live albums and don't really explore much of the man's work outside of that. And I'm most curious about a series of albums, namely the first one that came out in a series of albums later on in the 90s. This is Johnny Cash with American Recordings. He's revered for those live albums, Live in Folsom Prison and Live at San Quentin. But I find these later recordings and the context surrounding them to be pretty much just as good. And I think the story, and when I say story, I mean the real life aspects that take place around the conception of this album and it coming to fruition and then how the album sounds is all extremely interesting. I think it's really worth talking about. Even though it's relatively popular among Johnny Cash fans, I want to give the record its flowers.
This has been Unwarranted Music Opinions. I'm June Lindberg. I was here with Chaz Jenkins.
I mean, I'm awesome.
And Brian Courtney.
Chaz is awesome. Chaz is the best. I love Chaz.
And we'll see you again next time.